All right, church, if you have your Bibles, be turning to John chapter 1. John chapter 1, we have been in a series called I Am. And it's really pretty interesting if you do some research on the Gospel of John. There are actually 7 titles used, 7 names used in the first chapter alone. If you've been with us for any period of time, we studied through the book of Revelation together. And anyone remember what we called the book of Revelation series? 7. That's right, it was called 7. And the reason why is because in the book of Revelation, there was over 55 sevens that John uses. John wrote the book of Revelation, and John also wrote the Gospel of John, same guy. And in the Gospel of John, this 7 idea is continued. It's actually the start of it, really. He gives 7 names or 7 titles of Jesus here in the first chapter. There are actually 7 I am statements throughout the book of John. There are 7 miracles performed to prove the deity of Jesus throughout the book of John. And so this is a pretty important concept. And so today we're looking at the 7th of those titles as we wrap up this series, I Am. And so what I want to say right at the outset is this is actually one of the coolest passages of Scripture that I've recently discovered within the last couple years. This section that we're going to be in, John chapter 1, starting in verse 43. I will tell you, I was literally over in my office about 2 years ago, and I was reading through the book of John, got to this section, and it dawned on me what was actually happening here in the last part of John 1. And I don't exaggerate or joke when I say this. When I realized what John was saying at the end of this chapter, I literally stood up from my desk. My chair went flying backwards, and I put my hands on my head, and I was like, what did I just see? And I started laughing ecstatically because of how amazing it was. And so I'm expecting all of you to have that reaction today whenever we go through this message, okay? And for me, as I started looking into this, I realized, well, this wasn't actually some new discovery I had made. I started looking at other commentaries or whatever and kind of figured out, this is common knowledge for a lot of these people. But I had studied through the book of John countless times, and I had never connected the dots on what I want to show you in John 1 today. And so let's look at John 1, starting in verse 43. John 1, starting in verse 43. Here's what it says. The next day, so if you remember in our study so far, Jesus has met John the Baptist, different John than who wrote the book. And he has been experiencing some time with John the Baptist as John's baptizing people around the Jordan. And so it says, the next day after he met with John the Baptist, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip, and he said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." All right, so I want to be a little geeky this morning, if you'll permit me to be that. I've got a map that I want to put up on the screen. Here we go. Can you all see that? Is it possible for you to read that? Okay. So if you look where the red box is over here that says Perea, and then look just south of there, right, just below it, you're going to see this word, Bethany, east of the Jordan. Do y'all see that? Yeah? Okay, so if you looked back earlier in the Gospel of John, in the beginning of chapter 1, you know that John the Baptist is actually baptizing in the Jordan there in that area called Bethany, east of the Jordan. So you got a picture of where Jesus met John the Baptist, okay? You got the Dead Sea right there. It's the southern portion of this land of Israel. That's where Jesus is hanging out at, okay, doing his thing with John the Baptist. The next day, it says in our text today, that Jesus decided to go to Galilee. Do you see where Galilee's at? Okay, you're now going up north to the left, right? You see where the picture says Galilee there? Okay, so Jesus decides he's going to go from Bethany to Galilee, And if you look where it says Galilee in that big red and white box, if you look to the right, on the other side of the lake, you'll see Bethsaida. Do you see it just on the kind of the northern side of the Sea of Galilee? Raise your hand if you see it. I'm just wanting to make sure we're all on the same page here. Okay, so Jesus leaves Bethany east of Jordan, goes up north to Bethsaida, all right? So you see where he's traveling? Okay, the reason I'm saying all this is because it's worth noting. It's cool to be able to have a place that you're looking for, okay? So Jesus leaves Bethany east of Jordan. He travels north. He goes to Bethsaida. There in that region of Galilee, he meets these people, okay? This is the hometown of Philip, Andrew, and Peter. Now, he meets these guys there, and probably Peter's the most recognizable of all those names, right? We know Peter. He's the rock, right? We saw Jesus actually interact with Peter last week. And so now Jesus is in their hometown. This is where these guys grew up. Fun fact, that town, Bethsaida, its name literally means house of fish. How do you like to live at the place called House of Fish? It's the house of fishermen. It's the house of fish, the house of hunters. And so we've got this place where you actually find 7 of the 12 disciples are all fishermen. Did you know that? 7 of the 12 disciples are all fishermen. And then I want to show you something. Go over to John chapter 21. Same gospel, John 21. Remember, Jesus has now met Andrew, and Andrew's gone to get Nathaniel. They're all from Bethsaida, the house of fish. And look what happens in John 21, verse 2. We get some more information. John 21, verse 2. It says, Simon Peter, which we know was from Bethsaida, Thomas called the twin, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee. Okay, you see it? Where is Nathanael from? Cana of Galilee. Okay, go back to the map. Nathanael is from Cana of Galilee. All right. So if you see Bethsaida, you already know where that's at. And then you look over to the left, again, underneath that box that says Galilee, and you drop down about 5 cities. There you see Cana. Y'all see it? Yeah? Okay. So Jesus travels from Bethany east of Jordan. He goes up to Bethsaida, the house of fish. He meets several guys there. Andrew leaves to go find Nathanael. Nathanael's probably where? Cana of Galilee. That's where he's from, right? And when Andrew finds Nathanael, he says to Nathanael, come on, buddy, you got to see, we have found the one that Moses and the prophets spoke about. We found the Messiah. And if you were with us last Sunday, we talked about what it meant that Jesus was the Messiah. That's one of the 7 titles that John introduces Jesus as in chapter 1. And so Jesus is the chosen one. He's the anointed one. He's coming to set all things right. He's going to save all people. And so now Cana has been brought onto the world stage. And Andrew says to Nathanael, you got to come check out this guy. He is the Messiah. We have found him. And remember how Nathanael responds in our text today? He says to Andrew, come on, man, nothing good can come from where? From Nazareth. Now, if you're looking at Cana on the map, what do you see next to it? Just south of there is Nazareth, right? So Andrew has gone to find Nathanael. He finds Nathanael, says, we found the Messiah. And Nathanael's response is, there's no way you found this guy coming out of Nazareth. Okay, it'd be like us saying, hey, the Messiah is coming out of Newark, right? I know, I'm sorry. I had to come up with like the closest like town that had an N in its name, right? So it'd be like us saying Newark, right? Now, I'm not saying anything wrong with Newark, but I was talking to my friend over here, Michael, earlier, and I was in Aubrey for a long time as a youth minister there. And Pilot Point was the town right above Aubrey, and that was our rival. Like, it was those 2 towns right next to each other. It'd be looking like Cana and Nazareth on the map, and we were always at war with each other, right? And so what you see here in Nathanael's response is just this town's rivalry between each other, right? He's like, what kind of backwoods guy could come out of Nazareth, right? It's not going to happen. And so I just wanted you to see kind of the picture because I think it helps put everything in context. You see where all this is happening at? Okay? And so Nathanael's like, no way, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. And here's what I want to say right at the outset of this message as we're looking at what John is saying at the end of chapter 1. To me, it's been pretty profound as I thought through this week, just how great the God of love is. Our God is a God of great love. 7 of his 12 closest companions, the guys that Jesus would choose to change the world, were fishermen. Let that sink in for a minute. There you go, Jonas. Let that sink in for a minute. 7 of the 12 were just common fishermen. Nothing special about them. They're just blue collar, everyday kind of guys. You know, I always love it when someone comes to me and says, I have a hard time reading the Bible. I'm like, it's written in the common man's language, right? We just got to take some time and get to know it. But the Bible is also being written by a lot of these common, everyday, regular kinds of fishermen. These are your guys that are in the oil field. These are your guys that are on the railroad. These are your guys that are working just all kinds of regular, everyday jobs. We're not talking about PhDs. We're not talking about rocket scientists or physicists or any of that kind of stuff. We're talking about just regular, everyday guys coming from the house of fish. And that's who Jesus chose to change the world with. And if you're here this morning and you're like, God can't use me. I'm nothing special. I'm not super educated. I'm not super wealthy. I'm not super powerful. Well, praise God, because that's exactly who he chooses to use. I think of over in 1 Corinthians. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Look at what it says in 1 Corinthians 1:26. 1 Corinthians 1:26. Paul tells this to the Corinthian church. He says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord." I want to encourage you this morning. You have been chosen by God to do great things. And it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, how good looking you are, how good of a talker you are, how special you are. I know your parents told you were special growing up. None of that matters. God is the one who makes all the difference. And I have been praying the same prayer since I was in the 7th grade. God, do things only you can do. I want to see things happen in my life that only you can do. I want to see things happen in this church that only you can do. And you know what? God loves to answer that prayer. He loves to use you in ways that I could never dream of. He loves you so much that he sent Jesus to die in your place. God didn't choose you because you're awesome. God chose you because he chose you. By his will and by his mercy and by his grace and his love for you, God is calling you out of your complacency, out of your normality, and into his will. That's the God that we are introduced to in John chapter 1. We have these fishermen now interacting with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So cool. Let's keep going. Look it over in John chapter 1, verse 47. John chapter 1, verse 47. Here's what it says. Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him and said of him, behold, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? Or in our translation, you don't know me, right? Jesus answered him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Here's what struck me this week as I thought through this passage. How great is God's patience? How great is God's patience? I'm struck by how great God's love is, that he would choose lowly, nobody fishermen to have this meeting with, to have this revelation with. And now we even look at this patience being exhibited. Here's Nathanael going, nothing good can come out of Nazareth, just bad-mouthing the hometown of Jesus, right? And now Jesus is interacting with him, and he's like, you don't know me? Like, Jesus has exhibited such great patience with these guys. He has been patient over in abundance with them. And now he's having this other interaction with him where he's like, look here. He said to him, here is an Israelite with whom there is no deceit. And I remember reading this, and I just read right through that passage, and it never really clicked to me exactly what was happening here at this moment. But Jesus looks at Nathanael, and he says, behold, here's an Israelite with whom there's no deceit. And you can look at this and go, okay, yeah, look, he's just saying that Nathanael was willing to speak his mind, right? Nathanael was just saying, look, nothing good can come from Nazareth. And so Jesus is just saying, look, this guy he is who he says he is, right? He says what he says. Here's an Israelite in whom there's no deceit. You could look at it that way. I don't think that's actually what John's doing here. I don't think that's what John is trying to communicate to us. When Jesus looks at Nathanael and says, behold, an Israelite in whom there's no deceit, I think Jesus is actually making a connection for us. He says, behold, Nathanael, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. And then Jesus reveals something to Nathanael in our text. He says, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Let that sink in for a minute. Jesus had never met this man before. Jesus had never interacted with Nathanael before. But yet Jesus, of all the people on the earth, already saw Nathanael when he was under the fig tree in his hometown of Cana. Jesus knew everything. He's all present. He's all knowing. We might call him God. And Jesus is being patient with Nathanael. And Jesus has been eternal, and we've already been studying that in John 1, but I want to show you something that I think really John is trying to get us to see. So we're thinking about Nathanael, this Israelite in whom there's no deceit. Go all the way with me back to Genesis. I want to make a connection for you that I want you to throw your seats off and go, what? Here we go. Genesis chapter 25. Genesis chapter 25. You're like, why are we going back to Genesis when Jesus is talking to a man in the New Testament about being an Israelite in whom there is no deceit? Let's look. Genesis chapter 25. We're going to start in verse 24. Genesis 25, starting in verse 24. So we have Abraham. He's called by God. He's given the promise that he's going to be a great nation. Then Abraham has a son named Isaac. Isaac is given that same promise that God gave to Abraham. Isaac, you're going to have a great nation come from you. And we talked about Jesus as the King of Kings, Lord of Lords. We talked about that already in this series. But here's where I want you to see Isaac is now having two sons. And let's look at this story here in Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 24. It says, when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. The first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. So they called his name Esau. Afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So we get this picture that we're having two boys. One of them is red and hairy, and they call him Esau. How would you like to be called red, hairy guy? right? So Jesus is in the house of fish in Bethsaida. We have Esau, the red hairy guy. I'm glad I'm not being named after Bible characters, right? And then we have Jacob now. He's being named. And what's his name mean? It means grabbing the hill. That's what your name is for the rest of your life. Hey, hill grabber. What a great introduction to the world. So we have Jacob and Esau. We have Esau and Jacob. And it says in verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So Jacob's a mama's boy. Esau's a daddy's boy. And then verse 29, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and was exhausted. And Esau said to Jacob, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. If you're studying this in Hebrew, that red stew is a play on words from Esau's name, Red, right? And so we have red stew. Esau's the red hairy guy. They belong together. That's what we're supposed to get the sense of here. And so he says, I'm exhausted. Give me some of that stew. And then it goes on to say in verse 31, Jacob said, sell me your birthright now. And Esau said, I'm about to die of what use is my birthright to me? And so Jacob said, swear to me now. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate it and drank and rose and went on his way, that Esau despised his birthright. And so we have this introduction of these two boys being born into the world, and one of the first moments we have is Jacob deceiving Esau out of his birthright, basically tricking him to get rid of what was belonging to Esau just for some stew. And so this is who Jacob is. And we go on to keep looking at Jacob. Go over to chapter 27. Chapter 27, starting in verse 5. Look at what it says. Chapter 27 of Genesis 27, verse 5. It says, now Rebekah was listening to them, and Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So at this point in the story, Isaac, the father of Jacob and Esau, is on his deathbed. He's coming to the end of his life, and he tells his son Esau, I want some of your food. I love eating your game. Go get me some food. And Isaac's wife, Rebekah, hears this exchange and tells her son Jacob to go and pretend to be Esau. So it goes on to say in verse 5, Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord before I die. So the blessing of Isaac is at stake here. He goes on to say, verse 8, now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare them for delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will fill me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. And his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go bring them to me. He goes on to say in verse 14, so he went and took them and brought them to his mother. And his mother prepared delicious food, such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and he put them on Jacob, her younger son. And the skins of a young goat she put on his hands and on his smooth part of his neck. And she put the delicious food and bread which she prepared into the hands of her son Jacob. How would you like to have to pretend to be your son? And the best way you can pretend to be Esau is to take goat skin and put it on you. Man, what does that say about this guy's hair? Verse 18. So he went into his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat my game, that your soul may bless me. You see this deception coming out of the life of Jacob? Let's keep going. Look down in verse 35 of the same chapter. Chapter 27, verse 35. Esau comes in from the field, brings his father food, but his father has already ate, thinking he blessed his son Esau, but he actually blessed his son Jacob through deceit. And then here is how Esau responds in verse 35 of chapter 27. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. And Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. So we have this moment where we get this clarity that Jacob's name doesn't just mean one who grabs the hill. Jacob's name is also synonymous with deceit. Jacob's name is one that is linked intrinsically to lying and deceitfulness. And so why am I saying this about Jacob, who's a deceiver? And how am I linking this to John 1 when Jesus looks at Nathanael and says, behold, an Israelite in whom there's no deceit? I'm glad you asked that question. Go over to Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32. Genesis chapter 32, Jacob has fled. Esau's trying to kill him. A bunch of years have gone by, and now God has told Jacob to return back home. And so Jacob's like, I don't know if I can do that, because if I go back home, Esau wants to kill me because I've stole his birthright. I stole his blessing. I go home, he kills me. God's like, don't worry about it. You're going to go back home. I'll take care of it. And so he's now on his way back home. And here he gets to this moment where he's almost back home, and he meets God on the way home. Look at it. Genesis 32, starting in verse 24. Genesis 32, starting in verse 24. It says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? So this weird stranger shows up. We're not really given any clue at the beginning of this who this guy is. It just randomly start wrestling, which makes sense. They're guys, right? That's what guys do. They just randomly meet each other and start wrestling. And so they're wrestling, no one's winning. This man's clearly letting Jacob have some kind of upper hand until he then touches his hip socket and puts his hip out of joint. And now day is broken. They've been wrestling for a long time. And this guy's like, hey, I'm done. I don't want to wrestle with you anymore. It's been fun. Leave me alone now. And Jacob's like, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. So whatever this guy is in this story, Jacob sees him as one who can bless him. So Jacob knows something about this guy and about what he's able to do. We haven't yet seen what this is, so let's keep going. This man then asked Jacob, what's your name? In verse 27, he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob, which remember, Jacob means one who grabs the hill, or deceiver. That's what Jacob means. And so then this guy, verse 28, says, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, or deceiver, one who grabs the hill. But instead, your name will now be what? Israel. Your name will now be, what is it? Your name will now be Israel. We keep reading in this section to see exactly who this guy is. It says, your name will now be Israel. Why? For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. And then it says, then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of that place Peniel, which means I have what? Seen God face to face. So we're now revealed who this guy is that Jacob is wrestling with. Who is it? It's God. And I submit to you more specifically, who is it? It's Jesus. Jacob is wrestling with Jesus. And Jesus looks at Jacob and says, "What is your name?" And Jacob says, "My name is Jacob," which means deceiver. And Jesus says, "Your name's no longer going to be deceit. Your name is now going to be Israel." Guess what the nation, this great promise that God made to Abraham and Isaac was? The nation of what? Israel. And Jacob is now the father of this great nation. Jacob will have 12 sons that become the 12 tribes of. Now you know where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And Jesus looks at Jacob and says, "Your name will no longer be deceiver. It'll now be Israel." Now fast forward with me back to the book of John. Back to the book of John. Take a look at what he says back in the book of John. In verse 47, Jesus saw Nathanael coming towards him and said, what? "Behold, a what? An Israelite in whom what? There is no deceit." Do you see a link that Jesus is making? Jesus is saying, here's an Israelite that there was no deceit in. Right? Nathanael was like, what good can come from Nazareth? He's just a plain talker. He says what he feels. And Jesus goes, now here's an Israelite, the name that was Jacob before, in whom there's no deceit. The deceit of Jacob, no, that's gone. Here's an Israelite where there's no deceit. So he's making this link between Nathanael and all the way back to Jacob in Genesis. That's pretty cool, right? And you're like, yeah, but I think you're stretching this, right? You're taking something a little far, and it's not necessarily what John is saying. Okay, well, I don't agree with you. Let's keep going. John chapter 1, verse 49. It says, Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." So Jesus is like, hey, remember I saw you under the fig tree before I ever met you? I know where you live. I know who you are. And now his response to this is, wow, you are the King of Israel. You are the ruler of all things. And then he says in verse 50, Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe?" He said, you'll see greater things than these. What is the greater thing that they're going to see? What are these disciples going to see greater than Jesus saying, I knew you before we ever met? What greater things are these disciples going to see than Jesus like, I saw you under the fig tree before we ever even had this encounter? What does Jesus say these greater things are? Look at verse 51. And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Jesus says you're going to see greater things than these. And the greater things he says they're going to see is the heavens opened, angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Why is this so significant? Well, let's go back to Genesis. All the way back to Genesis. Genesis 28. We were reading about who in Genesis? Jacob, the deceiver. Genesis chapter 28. Genesis 28 starting in verse 10. Genesis 28 verse 10. Let's see what happens. Remember, Jesus says you're going to see greater things than this. You're going to see the heavens opened. You're going to see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. That's what Jesus says to Nathanael, who he calls an Israelite with whom there's no deceit. Genesis chapter 28, starting in verse 10. It says that Jacob, this deceiver, left Beersheba. Remember, this is before Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Okay, this is before that. So Genesis 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. And he came to a certain place, and he stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in the place to sleep. Okay, so you have this picture of Jacob. He's gotten tired. The night's set. He grabs a stone, puts it on the ground. That's a really great pillow. right? If you've ever needed a pillow, just grab a stone. And he lays down to go to sleep. Verse 12. He dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth. And the top of it reached to where? Heaven. The top of this ladder reached to heaven. And behold, the what? The angels of God. You see it, right? You're following me. There's a ladder. He's dreaming. Ladder goes to heaven. Heaven's opened up, and he sees these angels of God. And what are these angels of God doing? Ascending and descending. Like, what? I guess I'm the only nerd here that, like, Jesus looks at Nathanael and says, here's an Israelite in whom there's no deceit. Jacob has this dream thousands of years before this, where he's in this place called Bethel, and he sees the heavens opened and the angels ascending and descending on this place. And then in verse 13 of chapter 28, it says, behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord. He uses his name. I am Yahweh. I am. Remember in Exodus, God introduced himself as the great I am. And he says here in this moment, I am Yahweh. I am Lord. I am the one who is all things. And he says to him, I'm the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. And the land on which you lie, I'll give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I promised. And then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head, and he set it up for a pillar, and he poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at first. Here he meets the great I am. He meets the God of heaven and earth. This is the great I am. And in this moment, he sees the heavens opened up and a ladder set up and angels ascending and descending on the place, on the house of God, on Bethel. But then you go back to John. You go back to John 1. In John 1, Jesus says to them, you're going to see greater things than the fact that I just called you out before I ever met you. You're going to see what? Angels ascending and descending, not on what? Not on Bethel, not on a place, not on the land. You're going to see angels ascending and descending on what? The Son of Man. The Son of Man. Who is the Son of Man? Jesus is. In other words, what he's saying is, if that was the house of God, the place where the angels ascended and descended, guess where the house of God now is? Right here. Jesus says, I am God. I am the great I am. The same God of Jacob that wrestled with him, that named him Israel, that said, no longer is deceit in you, you're now Israel, looks at Nathanael and says, hey, guess what? There's no deceit in you. This is now Israel. And you remember when Jacob saw heaven open and the angels ascending and descending, and that was the house of God? You're going to see a greater thing than that. What's the greater thing than that? God's here. God has shown up. God isn't just in heaven and angels coming up. God has come. The great I am is now standing in your midst. He's talking to fishermen. If a king comes here, they're not coming here. I'm sorry, I love you. There's not many wise, not many noble, not many rich, not many powerful here. I mean, if you are, let me know afterwards, okay? But there's just not. And so why would God come and meet with us? Why would the great I am who spoke the world into existence come and meet with us? And yet he meets in the house of fish with a bunch of lowly fishermen because he is the God of love. He's the God of patience. And he's the God who calls you to come and follow me. This is crazy that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords says to Nathanael, you're going to see way cooler things than that. God has now come down. The house of God is right here. And he uses this phrase, Son of Man. I want you to go one last place and I'm done, I promise. Go over to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. Jesus says you're going to see the heavens open and angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man. Well, again, this is an Old Testament reference. Jesus isn't just saying random things. He's trying to get us to see the reality of the great I am made flesh. Daniel chapter 7, starting in verse 9, there's an Old Testament prophet named Daniel who gives this incredible prophecy in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. Daniel has this vision of these beasts, these kingdoms that would rise up, and yet these kingdoms would all be made nothing because of the great power of God. And it says in verse 9 of chapter 7, Daniel chapter 7, verse 9, it says, as I looked, Daniel's having this dream, this vision. It says, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Who's the Ancient of Days? God. God is the Ancient of Days. The Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A steam of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And we looked at this back in our Revelation series. It's actually how God and Jesus is described in chapter 1 of Revelation. And then look what happens. It goes on in verse 11. And I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And then look, verse 13. And I saw in this night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one, what? What does it say? Verse 13, out of the clouds of heaven came one like the Son of Man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and he was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Jesus is revealing himself as the great I am, who has come to rule and reign the nations. His dominion will never end. He is the Messiah. He is the King of Israel. He is the light. He is the Word. He is the great I am. And this great I am loves you. Loves you so much, he would die in your place. The Bible says that all of us are sinners. Every one of us have rebelled against the King. We deserve death because of our insolence, because of our rebellion, because of our sin. We deserve death. And yet Jesus looks at the fishermen. Jesus looks at the lowly. Jesus looks at the average. Jesus looks at the less than and says, I love you so much, I'll die in your place. The death you deserve because of your sin, I'll die for you. And Jesus goes to that cross and he hangs in your place. He dies, and 3 days later rises again because death cannot hold the king. And he says that anybody by faith can receive forgiveness, can receive life, and can receive sonship and daughtership into the kingdom of God. The great I Am is mindful of you. He's not ignoring you. He's not left you. He's not abandoned you. He's not forsaken you. And he says, come follow me. And so today I urge you, don't delay, because the King of Kings has come here today to meet with you.